Hey guys, UDT here, back with another tutorial. In this episode, I'm going to show you guys how to get your AI to predict where the enemy is going to be ahead of time so they can then shoot a projectile in the direction of that. I'm also going to show you guys a couple little tips and tricks that I found just from experimenting it that might improve your game. It kind of differs between the type of game you're going for, but anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So the first thing you guys are going to want to do is you're going to want to put this in whatever folder you want. For me, I've just got one named AI. I'm going to go ahead and make a new blueprint. It's going to be a character. I'm going to call it BP underscore projectile AI. I'm going to go ahead and open that up. We're going to come to our mesh. Just going to give it a random one just so we can visualize the actual AI turning. And make sure to position it so it's facing this arrow here because that's where the front is for your character. And then once we've done that, we're going to use pawn sensing. So we're going to go ahead and get that and add it. Now, for those of you that haven't used pawn sensing before, when you do get it in, you're going to want to make sure you compile it so you can see what I have up here. But there's a couple different things you can use this for. If you look on the right, it's got hearing, it's got your sight, and you can turn them on and off here. But basically, this is just an easy way so that if you have a sound effect that you spawn in over here and you want your AI to go, suss it out, see what's going on, you can use this. Or in our case, we're going to do it so that if the AI sees a player in front of him, it will then turn and shoot them. Now, these lines that we have going around here might confuse you, but the only one we need to focus on is this blue one. Oh, sorry, the green one. And the peripheral vision that I have here set up is the angle. So at the moment, you can see it's currently set to 90 degrees, which is just got it flat. And that has it so anything inside of this arc here, he'll be able to see. Now I'm going to reduce this a whole lot. I'm just going to set this to 1000 so it's a bit easier. And you can see now that if I move this peripheral vision inside of this whole cone when it's set to the maximum, which is 90, the character will be able to see anything that is inside of that. I'm going to go ahead and reset that to 90. And then we're going to start setting up our script. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on pawn sensing and get on C pawn. We then need to make it so that the AI checks to see if it is the third person character that we've seen. I'm going to go ahead and cast for that. Now, it might not be third person character for you. For you, it'd be whatever it is that you want the AI to see. Now, if you don't want to just be able to see one person, say you have multiple different character types, or they have different names, or you want it to be able to shoot at other AI, so there's multiple different ones. You don't have to do it this way. You could do it anyway, so it checks for all of them. You might not even need to check for it, because it might be fine if it senses any character. But for me, I only wanted to sense this one specific one. It also gives me a chance to get a reference for it as well that we will need later on. Now I'm going to go ahead and get a variable. I'm going to call this sensed pawn. Also going to promote this to a variable, so I have a player reference. You don't have to do this. As I said, if you're having multiple ones, you won't be able to do this because it would just be way too many casts. But for me, I don't have that issue, so I can cheat and do it this way instead of having to get the player reference later on by doing like get player character or some other way depending on what it is you need. Okay, now from here, we're going to make it so that our AI will actually turn and rotate to face the player. So we're going to use an event tick. Now you could try and get away with something other than an event tick, but it's just easier to use it because we want it to rotate smoothly. We don't want it to jitter or look slow. I'm going to get a branch. I'm going to drag this out a fair bit and add our sense pawn into there. Then going to go R interp to constant. I'm going to use constant instead of the other one. I actually forget what it is. But the other one doesn't rotate at a constant speed. It'll start slow and then it'll speed up and then it'll slow down again. If that's something you want, then you can use that. I can let you know what it is down in the comments. I've just forgotten what it's called. But then going to go ahead and get the actor rotation, if I can spell it correct. This will get the rotation of our AI, and we're going to plug that into the current one. We're then going to need to use a find look at rotation. And then we need to get the actor location for our AI. Then we need to get it for our player character as well. Now, if you haven't used find lookout rotation, basically what it does is it gets the start point of our AI's location. It then gets the player's location and it does the math for us to figure out what the rotation is in between them. So then our AI will then turn to face that rotation so that he'll slowly look towards our player character. I'm then going to, no, you don't need to split that. You can just leave that as is. Our interp speed, just for the sake of testing, I'm going to leave it at 60. We'll probably have to mess around with that and come back to it. Okay, I am, however, going to split this one, and then I'm going to drag out from Z and go set world. Can't do it from there, I guess. Set world rotation. Spell it right. Make sure you do capsule component. Then going to drag this out to the true one. Split that again and connect it. Now the reason why I'm only connecting the Z one is because if I was to connect all of them, if I show you real quick here, and then I actually drag our AI in, if I was to then like jump over him, you'll see he starts rotating in all these directions we don't want. So I have it set so we just use the one. That way he only rotates on the one axis, which will turn him side to side. And if we jump over him, he doesn't do like weird backflips and everything. Now you may be noticing now at this point that he might be a little slow for your liking, or maybe he's too quick. But if you want to change that, it's just this interp speed here. So if I was to double that, set it to 120, then I let him sense me, you'll see now he's able to keep up with pretty much spot on. But again, just for testing, I'm going to leave it a little slow. Okay. So now we have it so that our AI is rotating the faceless, but some of you at this point might be thinking that this might not work for you because I'm setting it up using an AI. If you're using this for something like a turret, you may be thinking that it won't work. But for you to get it to work with a turret, all you have to do is just have it so instead of the entire turret rotating, like the base and all, you'd have to set it up so that they're not connected and have it so that just the gun part of it that's mounted onto the turret rotates, and then whatever else needs to rotate so it looks normal. You would use that code on here, and instead of using your player reference here, sorry, you would use that. You would only rotate, here it is, the capsule component. Instead of rotating the capsule component so it rotates your entire AI, you would just get the gun mesh or whatever you have it under, and you would rotate it here. But anyway, we now need to actually do the math to predict where our player is going to be and the speed of the player, a couple other things. So, let's see. First thing we're going to start off with would be adding a direction for our player to be shot. So if you are doing a turret version of this or your character has a gun, this would just be like the very front of the barrel where it's coming from. But because I don't have that, I'm going to add an arrow in. I'm going to call it the direction projectile is shot. I'm going to come into my viewport, make sure I've got that arrow selected. I'm just going to drag it out a little bit so I don't have to worry about it colliding with my player. I'm doing damage to them. And then back in here, I'm going to quickly comment on this. Makes AI rotate to face player when player is sensed. Okay. So now getting started, we're going to go ahead and get the direction the projectile is shot. And then going to drag out and get the world location. And we're going to split that. I'm also going to need the forward vector. I'm not going to split that one. I'll drag out from here and times that by a float of 50. I'm then going to drag out and go plus float. And I'm going to add a couple more pins, it's not many actually. Then going to connect that one, and then I'm going to go plus float 100. Then connect that again. Now, if you're wondering why I've done this 100 here, it's just so that he doesn't aim at the enemy's feet, or in this case, the player's feet. I was having an issue with it, so I just had to add 100 there. You might not have that issue, so if you're wondering why he's aiming off, or maybe he's aiming too high or too low, it's likely because you either don't need this, or this number isn't correct for the scale of your character or turret or whatever it is you're using, so you just have to mess around with that. Now again, we're going to use the fine look at rotation. I'll drag out from there. Going to connect our start point to... Oh, I've done this wrong. Hey, sorry about that. I accidentally did a plus float. What I need is a vector plus vector. Which is going to come up because I had that one selected. Let's try that again. Vector plus vector. There we go. So we're going to split the top one. And then we go X, Y, and then connect Z to this one here. Then connect our vector down to here. And then our start point connects to there. Our target then is set up, so we're going to get our player reference again. A bit far away. We're then going to get a reference to the mesh. Probably easier way to do that is go get world location. There we go. That'll give us our mesh. Then connect that to the target. Drag this a bit. It's going to get a little weird in a second. I'll probably have to clean this up later. Let's see. We're going to need another find lookout rotation. Connect that to the start again. And then we connect our plus vector again. And that will go into the target one. Now we need to set up the rest of it down here. So to get this going, we need to set up our distance and figure out how far the distance is. So get distance 2. Our other actor is the play reference one. Our target is the self. Okay. We then need to divide that. It's not the divide one. That again. Divide that by float, which will be our projectile speed. Then I'm gonna leave that for a second actually. If you go ahead and make a projectile, if you have one or not, it's gonna leave that as is. We're going to add our projectile movement. And what I mean by the projectile speed is if you come all the way down here to the velocity, and say you wanted your thing to move not that fast, you made it 100, you'd have to make sure that that 100 you took and you put into this variable here. Projectile speed. And for whatever reason, if you decided 100 is not good enough, you want to make it like 1,000, you would then have to make sure you change that here, or else it'll mess up the mass. So you just got to make sure that for your projectile, make sure that however fast it's moving, you have it set there. Go ahead and delete that because I don't actually need it. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and go vector find split. We're going to also get the velocity. There we go. I'm going to connect that there. And then connect that there. Okay, so I'm going to quickly clean this up a bit. This is a bit of a mess to look at. Let's see, let's try to go up here. Straighten some of these up. Okay, a little better at least. Okay, so now we have that all sorted. So what we have here is it predicting the player's location. So it starts off by getting the direction that it's shot, and then I just had to add 100 here, as I said earlier, because it was aiming at the feet whenever it was shooting. And then we're getting the forward vector and adding 50 to it so that the direction it's shot is a little bit ahead, just so it's not colliding with the mesh. Then adding that and setting that as the start location, and then the target location, which will be where we wanted to predict ahead of the player to then shoot. So we get the player location, we get the mesh, and we get its location. We add that, and then down here, we are making sure that we have the distance to. So we've got the player reference as the other actor, and then target as itself. It then gets a distance in between them, divides that by the projectile speed, and then times that by the velocity that our player is moving at, and adds that to its current location, so we can be predicting ahead of where the actual player is, so it knows where to shoot. And then we're doing the same thing earlier as a fine look at rotation, so we've got where the target will be ahead of time, and then we have the start location. Another reason why you need the projectile speed as well is so that the AI can calculate how far ahead it has to aim, because it needs to know how far it is from the player, but it also needs to know its movement, or its projectile, its velocity in this case, so it knows how far to aim ahead of them. So now that we have all of that, this is where you would go ahead and you'd make a projectile, you'd spawn in that projectile, and you'd have it do its thing. So just to kind of show how you would set all of that up, and very quickly, going to go ahead and set up a projectile. So let's call this pp underscore projectile. Let's open that up. Going to add the projectile movement component. Going to come down here. I'm going to set the gravity to 0 because I don't want it to drop at all. And then we'll make the velocity, I don't know, let's try like 500. We'll see how that goes. So we've set it to 500, so we have to make sure to come down into here, set that to 500. Now this is a project that you think you'll be spending a lot of time on. I'd recommend commenting over these things to remind yourself. So for me, on my project where I have this, I've got it a comment on it, and then I've changed it to red, which you can do here. And then I've just written, make sure this is set to the velocity of the projectile, just so I remember. Anyway, back to making the projectile. I'm going to go ahead and add cone to it. I'm going to rotate it. Hope that's facing the right way. I guess we'll find out. Okay. So I've got a basic little projectile here. I now need to come back into here. We need to set up a system to actually spawn our projectile and shoot in the correct direction. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and make a custom event. We're going to call this spawn projectile. We're going to, I'll set up the rest of it first. So the fine lookout rotation we have down here, we're going to split that. And then we're going to get our direction the projectile is shot. Get the world location of that. Then going to need the rotation of it. And then get the forward vector. We then add those two together. So it's in plus vector, connect them. And then from there, we make a transform and connect that to our spawn active class, which will be our projectile one we just made. And connect that over there. Straighten it up so it's a little nicer. And I'm going to go ahead and split that one as well, because ahead of time we'll be connecting these in a second. Now, if you want to make an offset so your character isn't perfectly shooting every single time, because with something like this, it's being like hard-coded so the character, or the AI, sorry, has perfect accuracy, and the only way he won't have perfect accuracy is if right as the AI shoots a projectile, the player jumps or strafes a different direction to where he was originally going when the AI calculated it and shot its ball, or its projectile, sorry. But that can be very difficult, and depending on how fast your projectile is, kind of extremely hard to dodge. So if you wanted to, you could also add a little offset here. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do that. If you don't want an offset, just simply skip this step and connect Z up to here. But I have this set up originally for my one, so I figured it'd be worth showing you guys it as well. So I'm going to go ahead and make another variable. We're going to call this projectile offset. I'm going to make it a float. And I had this very small offset 5, yeah. So the reason I've got it 5 and not some massive number is because it's going to go to -5 to +5, so it'll be 10. And 10 degrees, once you start getting a range, it can be a fair bit. So we're going to go ahead and drag this one out into a plus float. I'll bring it down a little bit. I think I need a bit more space. We're going to get our projectile offset. I'm going to connect that. Then drag it down again. I'm going to double click on here and drag out and get a minus float. Add the offset again to there. We're then going to drag out and get a random float in range. The minimum will be the top one and the max will be the bottom one. Then connect that up here. Try and neaten this up the best I can. Great, that one. Yeah. Probably as good as we get. But basically what this is doing is it's taking our projectile offset and the z-axis, and it's minusing 5 from it here and setting that to the minimum that it can be offset by, and then it's taking it again and adding 5 to it, and that's the maximum it can be offset by, and then this number, this node here is randomly picking a number in between the variable that we just set there, and then setting that as our z1. Now this will only offset it on the z-axis, which will be the side-to-side one. So if you want to do one for your up-down or maybe side-to-side on a different one, because there's 3 different ones. So we've done the z-axis, which is this one here. But the x-axis will go here, and the y one is this way. So if you want to offset it in different directions, then I'd recommend doing that. For me, when I did this, I didn't need it because it was a 2D game, so I didn't have that issue. Like there was no way for the player to be jumping up. Actually, now that I think about it, you might not even have that issue because the character is rotating to face it anyway, so unless he has forward momentum, which wouldn't even be, I don't think it'll be an issue actually. Be interesting if anyone does make a game where the player is able to jump around a lot and he's not just moving on the one axis, let me know down below in the comments if this actually does need anything added to it to fix that. Because it might be alright because the air has been told to rotate already. Okay, but anyway, past that, don't touch anything with a scale because we want our projectile to stay the same size that we made it, unless for whatever reason you want it to be smaller or randomized, and you can change it here. Other than that, that should be it spawning it. So now we need to tell it to actually spawn it because a custom event is never called on here. So if we come back up to where we were working earlier, we're going to get this one here and connect that to a set world rotation, and we want to do that to the direction the projectile is shot. And then I'm going to add a delay. And then I'm going to promote that to a variable. I'm going to call that attack delay. So if you're having some kind of delay in between your attacks, which I'd recommend, because otherwise it's going to be doing like 40 every second because of the event tick, then you're going to want to add a delay here. I'm going to leave that as 0.2. We're then going to call upon our custom event we just made. So we're going to get the spawn projectile and add that there. And that should be doing its job. Now, when I start this, I haven't set up any kind of damage system, so all it's going to do is just push our player around when he sees it. But assuming this is working, there we go, we're shooting them out very quick though. Increase that delay. 0.5. I'm going to make the projectile a bit smaller here actually, so it's easier to tell. It's going to scale it to like 0.4. It's easier to tell if it's actually coming at us. Okay. For some reason, he's randomly shooting them in the wrong direction sometimes. I think, or maybe it's just he's predicting. No, it is correct. Okay, it's just the projectile itself is so slow that he has to aim so far ahead of me. But you can tell now, if I walk around, you can see that if I'm standing still, he shoots them directly at me. You'll notice that they're coming side to side a little bit, but that's simply because I have the offset on. I guess I'll temporarily turn that off. If I connect that there's no longer any offset, so he'll shoot it perfectly at my character every time. If I stand perfectly still now, you can see they're coming in a straight line at me and they're just pushing me, which is why you see some clipping there with the camera. It's because the projectiles are still on, or the collision, sorry. And now if I start walking, he'll start shooting them out in front of me, and they are hitting me as I'm going. If we go ahead and make it so the projectile shoots a bit faster here, let's go something like, I don't know, 2000, we'll see what that's like. Okay, he shoots them much quicker now. However, shooting them a little far ahead of me. I'm gonna pause and just double check that I haven't messed anything up. Okay, it took me about 2 minutes, but I just realized that I changed the projectile speed and I didn't come back into here and change it. So it's still set to 500. So the issue is that it's just calculating everything wrong. So I've given it the incorrect number. So if I set that to 2000, which is the projectile speed that I changed it to, I now let him sense me. So he's still hitting me. If I start running around, he's hitting me every time. If I jump about, he's hitting me. I think there shouldn't be any issues, even if you got a character that can move on multiple different ways, just because the way that I've set it up is instead of rotating the player character itself, which I have only on the Z axis, and having the projectile shot out of that, I have a arrow that we set up earlier, which is this one here, and I'm actually rotating that. So if I was to leave that turned on, you'd see that when I was moving around and jumping about, that's what's spinning around. So you can see the arrow now, it's rotating straight up in the air, and that's how it's able to tell the AI which way it needs to spawn its little projectile. Anyway guys, if you need any more help with this project, or you get stuck with something that I showed you, or you're wondering how to go about improving it, maybe you want to add a health system, or you need something, I don't know, maybe you need some help with getting your AI to move around and actually following the player, or maybe you want a bit more demonstration on how to set this up with a turret, just let me know down below in the comments and I'll see what I can do. But other than that, I feel like this should be a pretty good starting point for most people to get their projectile AI working. Anyway guys, that's all for now. See you next time.